the making of slice fractions. That game with the little baby mammoth.
That's right.
And you guys made it, really?
The game, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, no, we totally stole it from someone.
Yeah, awesome.
In China, actually.
Yeah, didn't know where we're here, but yeah. We've got a little mammoth, and he wants to traverse the space and get to his infinite quest to the right. And what you've got is some lava blocks that are blocking his way. And so what you want to do is cancel the lava with ice. So in this case, what I do is put a little bubble, and that cancel each other out. And then the second thing that's important to know is that area matters. So if I do only a little block of ice, that will nullify only part of it, and then I need to send another one. And what you do in the game is you just go along like this, and then at some point you realize that you made a mistake because you put too much ice, and that was blocking the way as well. And so what you're seeing here is dynamic hinting after a while that teaches you to gradually remove some complexity for you in the game. And so in this case, I clear the level, I move on to the next one. So I'm going to skip ahead quite far, and I believe it's this level here, where at this point in the game, the game is called Slice Fractions because you slice things in the game. Mm-hmm. And so at this point you're slicing, and what you notice is that there are 3 ice columns that are all of the same height. And what that tells you is that you need to send the same amount of quantity of lava there. And if I fail, the kind of feedback that we're trying to give you is hopefully intuitive in the sense that you will see right away that you put way too much lava there and not enough here and here, right? So that's the way that we convey the message in this case, that you need to split this shape in 3 equal parts. And the reason why we do that in the game is because teachers start teaching fractions that way in classrooms usually, and this is one of the important concepts in fractions. It's pretty early on. So I cleared away, he's happy.
That was the sound.
That was the sound, yeah. And there's a funky one too, but hopefully we'll get it. It's all random. And then, as you see, you move through a lot of levels, and eventually you get to real fractions in the game. And so so when you get to that point, you already know at that point that there is, whenever there's smoke, there's lava behind it, and this is 1/2 of lava, and this is 1/4. And what most people do in this level is they want to do 1/2 and 1/4, right? So they slice it that way, and they got it, but nothing happens because they didn't take into consideration the physics of it. So what they have to do, I'll try it again. What they have to do is essentially think about other ways of creating 1/2 and 1/4. And the concept we're getting with this specific level, where we're getting at, is it's a number only, and applies to, it doesn't matter how you slice things, it's about quantity, and it's about the concept of a half. And so that's the other way you can do 1/2 and 1/4 as well with a square. So that's the game. I've been really lucky to work with different groups of people in the past years, and both on the academic side of things and as a consultant for universities, like what seems to be the consensus out there is that what you want to do when you work on educational games is, or where the potential of educational games could be in the future, maybe that's a better way to put it, is when you really merge the gameplay and the learning aspects together. And so, some people have heard of the chocolate-covered broccoli analogy, right? And this is just an example of such a thing. So this is a game that I really played at some point that, you've got a basket that moves left and right, and then you click, and then that sends the basketball in the basket. And whenever you succeed in doing this, you get asked that question. And this is just an example of, there are many of these types of games, right? But it shows that the gameplay part is, in this case, even physically totally remotely separated from the learning aspect. And this is obviously a low production value game, right? Mm-hmm. But some higher production value games do this as well, where they have the learning subject which is separated. And this is not to say that games are not good at doing this, right? I think they can provide a lot of motivation to keep people doing drills and whatnot. But it sounds like there's a consensus that the potential for games could be also on the to do teaching in a different way than this as well. Mm-hmm. Right? And if we want to think about this, the best way to see it, I think, is to think about what players are thinking while they're playing a game. Mario is the one game that everybody knows. So, what you do when you play Mario, right, is you just explore. You don't know anything about the rules yet. So you start a game, and then at some point you jump in the question mark block, and what happens is, a mushroom comes out, and you don't know what the mushroom does at all. So what you do is you at some point eat it, and then you grow, and then you're not quite sure what that does yet. So what you do is you try different things, and then you jump. At some point you realize, hey, if I jump on these blocks will disappear, and that's pretty cool because I can change the landscape now, and I couldn't do that before. But what that did is that now this block is much harder to get, right? And so at some point I try, and then I get it, and then there's a coin that comes up, and I'm like, well, if there's a coin, what do coins do, right? And I'm not quite sure, so I'll keep that in mind for the future. And I think I jump a little bit higher now, so I'll do some tests, and boom, this question pops up, and this is not where my mind was at all when I was thinking about the game, right? I was really thinking about the game rules and discovering them by myself, right? So this is what it could feel like when you have the learning totally outside of the game, and I believe that games can do this pretty well, and that the potential of the true magic of learning through games can be in this part as well. So basically, Mario is an awesome educational game about Mario rules. It does that really brilliantly through gradual scaffolding and whatnot. It does a lot of educational theories pretty right. And if you want to put learning in a game, it would make a lot of sense to put it there rather than there. Right? And this is not to say that you can't do games about equations or formula either, right? Like Dragon Box is a perfect example of how you can take the game rules and apply them well to a subject like formula. So it's more about where you put the learning. So first, so I guess the way that we do learning in our game is also done through, it's more of a conceptual type of learning. That's the formula, more about types of things that you learn when you're in schools usually. So in this case, this kind of question, in the case of the game, is, I believe it's 113. It's, if you see here, we can do this thing now.
Yeah, that's great.
If you see here, it's pretty much the same question. It's just that the way we do it in the game is that we kind of merge different shapes together, and you have to split this in 4 equal parts. And so what most people do here initially is do it that way. Then they realize that it's not split anymore. So it's just a different type of learning target that we went for, I guess.
Okay.
So key takeaway, gameplay should be the same thing as the learning. And second takeaway is pretty interesting. So we knew we wanted a mammoth in the game, but we really were not sure if our intuitions were good about which mammoth would be most appealing for people, right? And so my personal opinion was that number 6 would definitely win because it's Ice Age, right? Like it really looks like what Disney or big animation companies would do. After a few tests, it turns out that number 2, which looks a little bit weird and funky, totally won on different age groups, both early and late elementary school. And not only that, but also in the States and Canada, it seemed to be a consensus around this, except for one classroom for which the results were these 2 guys. And something that was interesting for us is that we just couldn't figure it out until somebody told us that what happened in the classroom precisely was the teacher said something like, this is a game about slicing the ice, and they never saw the game, right? Which character do you want in this game? Which character is your favorite one, right? And so they all went for these 2 because they have longer tusks, and they could eventually use it to slice the ice, right? So this is really, basically you have to be there when you ask questions and make sure that the conditions are the same, right? And for us, the big takeaway is that, of course, you do a lot of playtests in classrooms and whatnot with the gameplay when the game really looks bad and whatnot. But you also want to playtest the visuals quite a bit, and we got a lot of good information out of that. And this is why we've got absurd things like a volcano cat and things of that nature. And so when you think about a game and you're creating a full experience, or you're trying to, it's, as a player, it's quite cool when the things change as you play, right? And usually what you see in the game is the challenges are getting harder, a little bit harder, and then it changes to the point where you can't even see the relationship between what you started with and what you got at the end, right? And in order to do that, you need to make sure that in the game that you're prototyping initially, in the early phases of development, you need to know if you have the potential for that full range of experience. And so what it was for us was basically to prototype using different subject matter. So we already knew that we could do fraction subtraction, fraction equivalency, that kind of stuff. but we did not know how far we could push it. So, you can see this is pretty early on, right? The mammoth is not in, its visuals are all not there. But we did test with fraction multiplication at that point, which video is not working right now, but, and we made it up to this, but we ultimately decided not to go for this one, but at least we knew that we could go on with such a game and spend, like a year and something developing that game. Fully confident that we'd have enough content to do a full experience. And talking about things that you have to cut or not, right? It's really hard to put that line of saying which feature will make it in, which features we can't. And for us, we weren't sure what that line was for a long while. And so, this is something that we had to fix. So in the game, again, early version, when we play tested in classrooms, people, the students, when we asked them questions, they were just looking at the shapes. They were not looking at the numbers. That was one problem. The second problem was that they weren't sure how the numbers apply to the shapes. And the third problem is that they didn't know what that meant yet sometimes, right? They never knew about fractions up to that point. They knew what 1/2 was, but not that numerical representation, right? So we had to explain all of that through the game, and we hadn't, we couldn't cut that feature. That was a game about fractions, right? So what we had to do was to have basically a symbolic representation of fractions to get there gradually. So what you see in the game is, this is 3 blocks of lava out of potential of 4, and then this is the same as writing it, that way with the arbitrarily line of fractions, right? And it gets to the meaning of numerator and denominator more than really explaining what these things are. And eventually you see that 1 out of 4 is the same as just writing it that way, and that gets you to it. But the problem that we encountered with this is that it takes a while to, it takes a lot of level to just teach you that through gameplay, right? And for us, it took about 32 levels to get to this notion. And the game does not look like a mathematic game before you reach that point. And so just marketing-wise, we had to try to preempt that as much as possible and try to convey the message that it is an educational game, but it's it basically, we couldn't find a better solution than this one, but it had its problems. And some of the things that we wanted to include in the game but just couldn't at that point, this is where we cut the line, is levels such as this one, where you want to get to the notion that 1/2 of a square of lava is the same as 1/2 of a square of triangle, as long as they have the same area, right? But if you look at that, these two things do not look at all like they have the same area. Yeah, and that's just like our reptilian brain is that way, right? Like it's higher and it's taller, so you assume that it's just bigger. And while we double check the code quite a few times, and they are the same area for sure. So we knew it's not because we didn't try. We tried like twice, 12 sets of levels, and we ourselves were convinced that it just wasn't working at all. So we had to cut it, and basically the takeaway is that if we couldn't make a feature, whichever it is, intuitive, then we had to cut it. And the last thing is that in the past 10 years I've been doing different playtests with different types of games and whatnot, and not one playtest have I seen people read at all. And maybe they'll read 2 to 3 words, right? Like maybe that part, that's it. But the rule is that the rule of thumb is that they will often not read anything, and the same thing goes for voiceover. They don't really listen to it. They might have missed it. Maybe the sound was off. There's a few things that could happen that you can't guarantee, right? And so for us, our goal was to try and see if we could make a game just without any sort of words at all. And that comes with its own sets of challenges. So at some point we had a snowball in the game, and its role is just pretty simple. You click on it and then or tap on it, it disappears, and whatever was on top will fall, right? And nobody wanted to click on the snowballs, oddly enough. Right? It's not something you would think to click on, right? So it totally makes sense. So what we did is what every good designer do, right? We added a little tutorial finger that goes like, pop that. And it worked. Like in all our playtests, everybody understood that you need to click on that thing, and that's it. The problem with this is that, and this does not show in playtests, but the problem is that if you rely on this type of tutorial, it's a mobile game. So what will happen is that players will learn that game rule, right? And then they will close the game, and they'll come back to it for a month. And a month later, come back, they'll have played like 35 of the game, right? They won't even remember this game at all, its game rules or anything. And then they're stuck because they're at level 35, and level 35 does not have any sort of tutorial. So what you want to do instead, as much as you can, right, is replace in our case, what we had to do is replace it with, we went for the bubble wrap kind of feeling of wanting to pop things, and so we went for a bubble that hopefully you feel like clicking on, and hopefully it's more intuitive that way. But what we have to realize is that it's fine to put tutorials. So in the first level, we do have a finger tutorial. It's just that we'd like to think that help for players that come back later. Mm-hmm. So key takeaway for us, tutorials are more like duct tape, so you can use them, but try to not rely on them as much as possible. So that was my part. So Dany is more about the project management side of things.
Yes. So hi everyone. So how do you manage a project whose scope is not well defined, whose gameplay is tentative at best, and that may radically change based on user feedback? Well, our vision at Ululab was really to have a game that would feel like a premium game, such as Angry Birds, but really at a fraction of the development cost. Slice fraction is bootstrapped, and essentially we were short on cash, manpower, and time. Like everyone want to do some magic, but sometimes, somehow, we end up with dust. And what I'd like to talk to you today are management tools that helped us achieve some magic. I do call them the boring magic, though. They're definitely not sexy, but they're useful. And this is my first time at Dust and Magic, so I don't know, maybe this is going to be like really familiar to you, and you'll say like, oh yeah, this is really cute. I learned all of that 20 years ago, but maybe some of this will be relevant to some of you. And if that's the case, well, some of those tools can help you, like they helped us, avoid some traps, so that you can really focus on the magic. So, boring magic. So choosing your vision wisely. So in other words, don't try grandiose if you don't have the budget to pull it off. Life of Pi, for example, which was a beautiful movie, would have probably made a really crappy indie movie. My point of view is that the mobile developer has figured this out much better than many other software engineering fields, but still, I still think it's worth mentioning. Something we really learned over time is that it's better to have a really small idea, but really, really well executed, than having some large ambitions, but a really mediocre execution. And this is why for Slice Fraction, we really chose to do a 2D game with a very conservative formula. With our time and money constraints, we couldn't really do 3D or a lot of features, and because with these types of features, we'd essentially be really constrained on resources and would have barely achieved the minimum. I think it's really different than just saying think small. It's more that we realized that a lot more magic would come out of polishing our product over and over, rather than just adding more bells and whistles. And by the way, the building over here, the expensive Dust, that's a building called the Ryugang Hotel. It's in Pyongyang, North Korea. And I personally think it's one of the ugliest buildings in the world. Mm-hmm. It was also supposed to be finished in 1989, and for some reason, it's still being built today.
So takeaway, only bite what you can chew. Choose where to innovate first. So essentially, you can't innovate on everything. Innovation is inherently risky. And when you're cash strapped like us, risk is not your friend. So we had to make sure that we focus on the right priorities, and we had to ask ourselves really, really hard. So where do we want to be different, and how can we stand out from the crowd? So we knew we could not compete with bigger competitors who were way more experienced than us, had more resources, and they would beat us on artwork, features. So we really chose to actually focus our efforts on being really, really good at integrating gameplay and learning. In all of the other areas, we decided to be safe and not innovate. That way we could keep cost and risk to a manageable level. It doesn't mean you can do good for those other aspects. We had a very little graphic budget, and still our artists were able to do really wonders with essentially nothing. Like, I like to show this because my team really did great work. If you look at the different elements, you realize that the trees always repeat each other, and the textures are essentially always the same. So that way, with very little, we were able to do a lot, and that was keeping things cheap and not risky. So takeaway, you can't be the best at everything. So back in a previous life, I was working at Microsoft, and I was having a discussion with the boss of my boss about the main question was the art of shipping. Like, the question was, what makes a great product, and how do you know when you're ready to ship? And he came to me with the sphere metaphor. So in the sphere metaphor, imagine that all the features and all the aspects of your product are kind of part of the skin of a sphere, like its surface. And your job as a creator is to keep that sphere really, really smooth. You really want to make it, as even as possible. And that's pretty important. So let me give you an example. Let's say, I have a game, and my graphics are beautiful, my gameplay is fantastic, but the game crashes all the time. Then obviously I haven't brought my game to its fullest potential. I probably would have been better to just have a Blender game, but make a bit more work on code quality, and that way it wouldn't have been crashing so much. The same kind of goes for feature. If you had, with this philosophy, if you had one more feature and it's subpar, you have a very high risk of actually lowering the quality, the whole overall experience for the whole product. And actually, I have an example of that that we did. So in Slice Fraction, we had this grand vision of doing parallax effects between level transitions. So parallax is actually when you move the camera like this, you see all the layers in the background moving at different speeds. So we're really, really excited about that. From a technical perspective and from an artistic perspective, we really wanted to have this really smooth and awesome transition. But while we were implementing it, we realized that we would never be able to achieve the level of quality and performance we were looking for with the time constraint and cash constraint that we had. So we had to make a tough call, essentially. Do we ship with either subpar transitions, or do we cut the quality somewhere else, or do we just cut our losses and remove the whole feature? And obviously, maybe you don't realize that you're making this decision, but if you continue working on it, it's less professional because you don't call the shots, but you're still taking a decision to a certain extent. And we decided to cut it, actually. Which, I mean, we can always wonder if people would have liked it better, but our ratings for the game were really, really good. So it turns out nobody actually asked us, I would have really enjoyed the game more if you had like some smooth transitions. So it didn't matter to users at all, just to us, So the takeaway is keep your product well balanced. Another one that I think is really interesting is be shippable at all time. I'll figure out where my text is now. So what does that mean to be shippable at all time, essentially? Well, if I look at the sphere metaphor, if I reuse it, essentially it means always keep that sphere smooth, even during the development process. So it means that your product development will be very iterative and will look like an onion. And I'll give an example to show why I think this is important. So let's say I build a game, and I still want to make that sphere, but I want to work it in a more linear way. So I want to lower my management costs and everything. So that way, I don't waste time micromanaging every single loop of it. So first I make my awesome great game engine, and it contains all the feature that the plan actually had in mind. Then I integrate some really awesome graphics, and then I integrate some really great gameplay. Or so I think. I think it's really smooth. I think the sphere is awesome. Then eventually I'll be done with that, and I'll have to actually show it to people, show it to kids. So I take my game, I go in a class, and I show it to them. And I see the kids are polite, but somehow they're like, oh well, this is okay. But you see they don't really engage. And as the playtests go along, you realize it always gets stuck at the wrong spot. Something's wrong, and they don't really get it at all. Oh no! Actually, what they see as a sphere is this. And unfortunately, if you look at the budget I have left, I don't have enough money to actually fix it. So what I mean at that point is a mediocre game. So at Ululab, essentially, as Frank said, we never get it right the first time. That never happens, So we're stuck back to this stupid onion, and we have to iterate, and we have to be really humble about things, and we have to, work hard and show it to people. Every single iteration, essentially, you make sure your sphere is smooth. If it's not, people will tell you that you try to readjust, and eventually you end up in this green zone where this always looks yellow, but on my screen it's actually green on the edge. And that's kind of where you know that your sphere is fine. You can ship at that point. I have a different example also of how this can be useful to keep your sphere smooth at all time. So back last December, we were a bit disappointed because we knew we couldn't make the holidays for our shipping date. So we were a bit disappointed. But eventually we saw the latest blog post on Escapado's blog from our very own Pierre over here. And Pierre mentioned that his sales for Christmas obviously were a hot season, but that January and February were also very good months. So we told to ourselves, oh well, we can't make December, but perhaps we can try to achieve February or end of January or something like that. So at that point, we got really excited, and we decided, yes, let's march on. Let's try to use our holiday season to just finish the product. We know it's well rounded, so it should be easy to ship at that point. So we worked on that, and while working on it, one of the things that we didn't even bother to implement at that point were game menus. We were like, well, we're professional. Games menus are easy. It's going to take 2 days. Turns out it took 2 weeks because of technical issues. So these were my holidays, not happy holidays. I was, essentially supposed to be on vacation, but coding the whole time, trying to go around things and so on. And the funny thing, is I thought my sphere was kind of round and kind of smooth. So the weeks before the holiday season, actually, I was working for maybe a week and a half on implementing something called A/B testing. For those who are familiar with that, we really wanted to do like the big boys, like we want to do A/B testing ourselves and be able to change our product, while it's launched. And turns out with the rush schedule, we never could finish this, so it was all wasted work. It would have been much better to actually do my game menus, make sure my sphere was really round, and then be ready for shipping at that point. So my takeaway is like, the development process is onions. Just think of onions. Keep everyone efficient and independent. So that's a bit the same kind of concept that applies to whole project that really helped us be really flexible. It also applies to individuals. So being iterative for individuals is also really important. Something we realize is that if you decouple people as much as possible and you allow them to iterate on their work by themselves, and you remove all the roadblocks from them, then the creativity output that you'll get from them is exponential. And one way we did this is we invested a lot of our times in creating good tools so that the developers and the game designers were really able to work without being blocked on each other. So at the end of the project, actually, Francois was able to take some kind of Lego blocks and glue them together and create new games mechanic from that and new levels without writing a single line of code. So at that point, I could have passed away and Francois would have been able to finish the project, no problems. But we did actually a pretty poor job with the same concept with our artists. So essentially, anytime Maite, our main artist, wanted to make a whole iteration loop, even though she's really talented, she was blocked on us at that point. And it wasn't just technical, like the whole process was broken, it was terrible. So we would, mostly Francois would lose about a whole day of work, just giving her feedback and, integrating her work with the project. So that way, she couldn't iterate really fast and she couldn't improve things at a good pace. The only reason why it worked for us is just because our art needs were much lower than our game development needs, for example. So we were able to manage finishing it, but it never scaled at all. So that's definitely something in the future that we'll work on, and that will help us drive much better art quality at a lower cost. So my takeaway for this is notice where your team members spend their time. If there's any roadblock and they're technical or they're not necessary to their creative flow, try really hard to remove them, and then you'll get an exponential benefit from it. So as I said, we were really low on cash. This is actually our headquarters, also called Frank's living room. So this is where the magic happened for us, and hopefully next year, we were looking for additional fundings, things like this. So hopefully next year we'll have an actual picture to show you, something more glamorous, with glass window door or something. So thank you very much. It was great to talk to you. Hopefully some of these key learnings were useful to you. And if you have any war stories for us that you'd like to share, we'd be really, really happy to actually hear about them. Thank you.
We intentionally left room for questions with this presentation because I don't know how we're doing on schedule so far.
Yeah, we're doing good. Why don't we also have the next couple people that are going to do demos? We're going to try to do a couple demos after this. So if those people, I think it's Tristan and Valerie.
So I'm going to skip my turn because I can't download it.
Okay. So then Happy Pappy, that would be number 2. But if you guys come up here for questions, and while you guys are getting ready for the demos, we can do questions. So I'll bring
you mentioned that since the game progresses so slowly, that some parents had questions about the app, and it was educationalist. I think how bad of a problem was that for you? Is that a few emails or is that
emotionally or in terms of emotionally it's crushing. Yeah, I mean, we did receive some emails. It wasn't the majority of people. We did receive some emails. We knew about the problem before shipping, so that helped a lot because we have in the screenshots is where we try to address it, basically. So Dragon Bus did this pretty well for the first app where, thank you. So Dragon Bus, I think, did that really well with their first app where they have one screenshot or a series of 3 screenshots, something like that says after 5 minutes, after 10 minutes, after half an hour, it will look like that, right? Like believe us, it will look like that. And it says that in the screenshots itself. So I don't know how successful it was, but we did a slide, a screenshot where
it's split in 4 and it says, after 10 minutes, whatever, and then you get to the math portion. So, I mean, I have something to add to that. We were kind of lucky because we were chosen by Apple on the day of launch. That gave us some credibility as well. So maybe, I mean, I'm just speculating, but maybe that also helped people say this is probably not just bullshit. And the rating were fairly high, so we got an average rating of about 4.7. And that again, most people would actually see this and probably be a bit more hopeful that some good stuff will come out of it. But essentially, we need to do A/B testing to really know for sure. That being said, the percent of people who actually got reimbursed because they didn't like it was less than 1%. So I think actually the results were fairly good.
Just a really quick comment. My guess is that they picked that mammoth because the eyes are the biggest one out of all the choices. And the one that you liked the best had the smallest eyes.
That's right. That's a good point.
So I would just guess that it's the size of the eyes, in addition to the wackiness, but just
Actually, that's a good point. And the one we had there was like a baby mammoth that's not yet in the game, but this one does have big eyes.
And when you look at the charts in the App Store, there are a lot of eyes looking back at you.
Yeah, I can't.
It's a top 10.
Any other questions?
I just have a comment. I can be loud.
All right, be loud, sir.
Yeah. The whole thing about not having instructions, and so what we found was that even if you had instructions, that they only hear the last thing you say. So if you give them 3 instructions, they'll only remember the last one, because they're so focused on getting to want to play. Now, you maybe get away with 1 instruction.
Right. So yeah, I guess it's the same for words as well. It's only 2-3 words, right? Because like more than that, you just read the end maybe.
That's right.
Why did you said that there is a problem where the user come back and he has not the instruction anymore because he doesn't remember the last time he used the game. But actually, why don't you put the instruction again where when there is some fail, about 10 fail or something?
Right. Well, mostly technical reasons, honestly. It would have been smart, I think, to no matter how intuitive the game is or anything like that, right? If you detect that the user didn't come back after a month, right? To at that point add dynamic hinting. The way we did hinting was all hand authored, and so literally we say the hand goes here for that one bubble, and then it clicks on that after X seconds, right? So technically, for us to have done something like that, we would have had to have something that worked for all levels, for all sorts of things you have to do, right? So slicing, popping bubbles, like all the things that we wanted to have to
Okay.
So, but it's a smart idea.
Yeah.
We just couldn't do it. Yeah.
Actually, my first time, I think I just say that each time the app was launched, I shown the instruction.
Yeah.
But just a little bit, you wait a little bit and so.
Yeah.
It also depends on the depth of your gameplay. Like if you have a lot of game mechanics, then at some point it gets hard. So probably the ideal solution would have something that's adaptive. I know some people in this room, Seven Academy did some games that had part of that. And the more complex your gameplay becomes, the higher the learning curve has to be, and so on. So adaptive probably would be a good way to solve that, where you can actually backtrack it. And, tutorials are part of that solution, I guess.
But you think it's a very important problem or not? Because I did it because I thought it could be a problem, so I say, okay, let's do it like this. It's fast and simple, and
sure. I mean, it's more of a, I guess, a key takeaway, and something that we used to say when I was working in the game industry is that tutorials are basically admitting failure as a designer in some way. And the reason why I say this is because you need a tutorial because they just didn't intuitively understand it, right? So it's more to that point. And if you have to do tutorials, absolutely do them like the way you're talking about it, and maybe more dynamic as well.
Mike.
Yeah, but if you do something innovative, you need some tutorials, because if you do something new, sometimes you cannot...
I mean, Ululab is a really good example, I think, of something that doesn't have tutorials so much. Maybe they have a finger or something, but most of their things are...
I don't think so.
There was another question.
That's VGA, Lightning. No, that one, on the iPad mini.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. We should have tried maybe a few alternate versions afterward.
Thank you.
Well, guys, congratulations on a phenomenal first app. On behalf of the children and the teachers of America, please make another one.